The champagne was warm by the time I finally stopped pretending to drink it. I'd been holding the same glass for 40 minutes. Rotating it slowly between my fingers like that would make me look less lost, less like someone who had absolutely no business being at the Harrington Foundation Gala. The ballroom at the Langham was the kind of place that made you feel your own smallness. 40-foot ceilings, chandeliers that probably cost more than my apartment building, and somewhere between 300 and 400 people who all seemed to know exactly why they were there and exactly who they needed to talk to next. I did not. I was there because my coworker had food poisoning and handed me her ticket at 4:30 in the afternoon with a text that said, "Go, eat something nice, don't waste it." I'd thrown on the only formal dress I owned. Black, knee-length, the one I'd bought for my cousin's rehearsal dinner 2 years ago, and told myself it would be fine. It was not fine. Everyone at these things traveled in pairs, minimum. Couples who leaned into each other to murmur something private and then laughed. Groups of men in tuxedos who shook hands too firmly. Women who air-kissed and said, "You look incredible," before immediately looking over each other's shoulders. I'd circled the perimeter of the room twice, eaten 3 pieces of bruschetta from a passing tray, and found the quietest corner near a pillar that was half hidden by an enormous floral arrangement of white peonies. That's where I was when he first walked in. I didn't know who he was, not then. I just noticed the shift, the way the energy in the room changed almost imperceptibly, the way certain heads turned. He was tall, dark-suited, the kind of man who moved through a crowded space without adjusting his pace for anyone. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. A jaw like something architectural. He had the unhurried quality of someone who had never once in his life needed to rush. "You're hiding." I startled so hard I nearly sloshed the champagne. A woman beside me laughed. Soft, not unkind. She was in her 60s, white hair swept up, wearing a necklace I was fairly sure contained actual sapphires. She nodded toward my pillar. "Don't be embarrassed. I hid behind that same pillar in 1987. Gerald Harrington himself found me there." She smiled at the memory. "I married him 4 years later." I laughed, genuinely, for the first time all evening. We talked for a few minutes. She was Margaret, a board member. She'd known the Harrington family for decades. She asked what brought me. I explained the food poisoning coworker situation, and she seemed to find this delightful. Then someone across the room caught her eye, and she excused herself with a pat on my arm, and I was alone again. Except I wasn't. Quite. The tall man from the entrance was maybe 15 feet away now, standing with a small cluster of people who were very clearly eager to be standing with him. He was nodding at something someone said, glass in hand, and then, for no reason I could identify, he looked directly at me. Not a glance. An actual look. The kind that takes a beat longer than accidental. I looked away first. I was contemplating my third circuit of the room when I felt someone come to stand beside me, close enough that it was intentional. "You've been to the bruschetta tray twice," he said. "I'm starting to think you're here for the food." I turned. It was him. Up close, even more, something. A presence that was hard to name without sounding ridiculous. His eyes were a dark gray-green, the color of the ocean, right before a storm. 3 times, I said. I went back a 3rd time. "You missed it." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. "My mistake. The bruschetta is genuinely excellent." "It is," he agreed, like this was a perfectly normal conversation to be having. "The fig and prosciutto? That's the one." He extended his hand. "Thomas Vance." I shook it. "Sophie Calloway." He repeated my name once, quietly, like he was filing it somewhere. "You're not with anyone tonight." It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. "My coworker had food poisoning. I inherited her ticket, generous of you. Or deeply masochistic. I haven't decided." This time he actually smiled. Brief, but real. "Which firm are you with?" "I'm not with a firm. I'm a ER nurse. At Cedars." I watched his face for the flicker that sometimes happened when people recalibrated their expectations of me. But it didn't come. "My coworker is a hospital administrator. This is more her world than mine." "Emergency medicine," he said. "Long shifts. 12 hours, 3 or 4 days a week. Sometimes more. And on your nights off, you come to charity galas and hide behind pillars. Just this one night. And I prefer to think of it as strategically positioning myself near the floral arrangements. He looked at the peonies, then back at me. Thomas, someone called from the cluster he'd left. A man in a very expensive gray suit, the kind of impatient tone that expected to be obeyed. Thomas didn't turn right away. He kept his eyes on me for one more second, something considering in his expression. Then he said, at a volume only I could hear, "I need a favor. I don't know you." "I know, but I'm going to ask anyway." He tilted his head slightly toward the impatient man in gray. "That's my business partner. His wife has decided that the most productive use of this evening is to introduce me to every unmarried woman at this event. She means well. I've been introduced to 6 people in 40 minutes. I blinked. "That's a lot. It's exhausting." He said it plainly, without self-pity. "I'm asking you to talk to me for the next hour. Just be here. You don't have to do anything except exist in this conversation. And in return, I'll introduce you to Margaret Harrington. You already met her. She likes you. She sits on the board of the Cedars Foundation. Your hospital's pediatric wing has been waiting on a grant decision for 8 months." I stared at him. "I may have overheard your conversation," he said, without apology. "You were eavesdropping. I was 15 feet away in a quiet room. You were speaking at a normal volume. I should have said no. Every sensible, self-preserving instinct I had said no. He was a stranger who had just offered me something I genuinely wanted in exchange for what was, on the surface, almost nothing. And that was exactly the kind of deal that came with fine print you didn't discover until later. 1 hour, I said. 1 hour, he agreed. His business partner appeared at his elbow, approximately 30 seconds later, his wife a step behind. A bright, well-meaning woman named Carol who looked between us with barely concealed delight. "Thomas, we were just about to." "Oh." She stopped, looked at me, looked at Thomas. "Carol, this is Sophie Calloway." Thomas said it in a tone that communicated without stating that I was not someone who needed to be introduced to anyone tonight. "She's here with me." Carol's whole expression rearranged itself. "Oh, of course. What a beautiful dress." She was warm, genuinely so, and I felt a small stab of guilt for deceiving her. "Are you in the industry?" "Our medicine," I said. "Cedars-Sinai. How wonderful." She touched my arm. "We need more people like you in these rooms." The business partner, whose name was Richard, I gathered shortly after, was already steering Thomas toward a conversation about a development in Century City. And just like that, I was standing next to a man I'd known for 6 minutes, being absorbed into his evening like I'd always been part of it. The next hour was strange and unexpectedly easy. Thomas Vance, it turned out, was not the kind of man who expected you to perform. He didn't require me to be charming or impressive, or to fill silences. When he introduced me to people, he said my name and my profession and left space for me to be a person, rather than an accessory. When someone asked how we'd met, he said, "Through a mutual friend," with such calm authority that no one questioned it. I learned things about him in pieces, the way you do when you're actually listening, rather than waiting for your turn to talk. He'd grown up in Pittsburgh. His father had been a steelworker. He'd put himself through Pitt on loans and a partial scholarship, then built a real estate development company from one property in Allegheny County into something that apparently now had a footprint across 6 states. He did not volunteer any of this. It came out sideways, in references, in the way he talked about the city when someone mentioned the downtown Pittsburgh project his company had just finished. He also had a quality I had rarely encountered in rooms like this. He listened, not the performance of listening while mentally composing your response. Actual attention, the kind that made you feel like what you'd said was worth hearing. At some point, Carol's husband drifted back with another man, a colleague, and the conversation turned to zoning laws, and I found myself standing slightly outside the circle, studying the floral arrangement again. Thomas glanced over twice. The third time, he shifted half a step so that I was back inside the conversation without drawing attention to the move. He noticed. He adjusted. He did it without making me feel managed. That was the moment I understood why a room full of very powerful people kept looking at him. He found Margaret again at 45 minutes, exactly as promised, steered us toward each other with the light efficiency of someone managing 2 chess pieces, then stepped back enough to give us room. Margaret remembered me, lit up even, asked about my unit, my team, what the grant would specifically fund. I told her about the pediatric trauma bay. The equipment we'd been patching together for 2 years, the outcomes data our chief had compiled, the kids we'd lost time on, because our imaging setup was a decade behind. She listened with the focused attention of someone who had made consequential decisions for a long time. Before she moved on, she pressed a card into my hand. "Call my assistant Monday," she said. "First thing." I stared at the card for a second after she left. "Thank you," I said when Thomas appeared beside me again. "You did that," he said. "I just introduced you. You knew she'd respond to the pediatric angle. I knew she lost a grandson 7 years ago. Pediatric cardiac emergency." He said it quietly, without drama. "She funds the things that matter to her." I turned to look at him fully. "How do you know that?" "I pay attention." He paused. "And I read the Foundation's annual reports. Do you always do this much research before you do someone a favor?" "I do research before everything." He took a slow sip of his drink. "Something amber. Probably scotch. You should too. It's how you find out who's actually worth trusting." I didn't have a response to that. I wasn't sure if it was wisdom or a warning. The hour was up. More than up. I checked my phone and it had been 1 hour and 40 minutes. Somewhere between the pediatric grant and a conversation about urban infrastructure that I had unexpectedly found myself interested in, I had lost track of the deal. "I should go," I said. "I have a 6 a.m. shift tomorrow." He walked with me toward the coat check, unhurried, hands in his pockets. We passed Carol on the way out, and she waved with genuine warmth, already clearly composing a story about us in her head that bore no resemblance to reality. Outside, on the steps of the Langham, the November air hit hard and clean after 2 hours of heated ballroom. Downtown LA, spread out below us, lit and humming. "Your car?" he asked. "I drove myself." I pulled out my keys. He nodded, and then unexpectedly, "I'd like to see you again." I turned. "Not like this," he added, a slight gesture toward the gala behind us. "No event, no favor. Just dinner, if you want." I looked at him for a moment. The way the light caught the gray in his temples. The way he asked without pressure, without the usual performance of male certainty that expected a yes before it had been given. "I work Tuesday and Wednesday," I said. "I'm off Thursday." "Thursday," he said. "I don't know anything about you." "I know." He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Simpler than I expected. Name, number, nothing else. "You could look me up. I'd recommend it, actually. Better to go in with full information." I took the card. "Good night, Sophie Calloway," he said. I drove home in a strange, unsettled quiet, his card sitting in the cup holder, the Pediatric Foundation card in my purse. I told myself the evening had been an exchange, nothing more. A transaction that worked for both parties. I looked him up when I got home anyway. Thomas Vance, as it turned out, was not just a developer. His company, Vance Capital Group, had built affordable housing developments in Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Baltimore alongside the commercial projects. He'd testified before a Senate subcommittee on urban housing policy 2 years ago. There were profiles in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the LA Times business section. A mention in a Forbes list he appeared to have made no effort to publicize. There were also things I found that gave me pause. His name appeared in coverage of a federal investigation into a construction bid rigging scheme in Chicago, not as a subject, but as a witness. He'd cooperated with the FBI. The story had eventually named 2 other firms. His had been cleared, but being adjacent to that kind of thing, even cleared, said something about the world he operated in. I sat with that for a while. Then I texted the number on his card. Just, "Thursday works. Where?" He responded in 4 minutes. "A restaurant in Silver Lake, a reservation time, nothing else." Thursday dinner turned into Thursday dinner, and 2 hours of walking around the Silver Lake Reservoir after. Because neither of us had wanted to stop talking, he asked questions that went somewhere. Not small talk performance, but actual curiosity about my work, the cases that stayed with me, what I did with the weight of them. I told him about a 12-year-old boy we'd coded for 11 minutes before he came back. About the look on his mother's face in the waiting room, when I walked out and she saw mine and knew, before I said a word, that it was going to be okay. He was quiet for a moment after that. "I don't know how I'll hold that," he said. "You don't hold it," I said. "You just carry it and keep moving." He looked at me like I'd said something that landed somewhere specific. I didn't ask where. He told me about Pittsburgh. His father's hands, always cracked from the mill, the way he'd press them flat on the table when he was thinking. The neighborhood that got hollowed out when the steel industry collapsed. The houses that sat empty for decades. How he'd bought his first property there. A vacant row house 2 blocks from where he'd grown up. And rehabbed it, not because it made financial sense, but because he needed to prove to himself that things could be put back together. Is that why you do the affordable housing projects? I asked. He considered it. Partly. And partly because I was very lucky and very stubborn, and I know exactly how many people are just as capable as I am who never got either of those things. 3 weeks in, I told my friend Gina about him over coffee on a Sunday morning. She listened with the focused expression she reserved for things she thought might be important. "And you like him," she said. "I don't know yet. You texted him back in 4 minutes." "He texted me first." "Sophie." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "When was the last time you talked about your dad with someone you'd known less than a month?" I hadn't realized I'd mentioned him. That was the thing. The conversations with Thomas had this quality of moving into territory I didn't usually reach for quickly. Not because he pushed, but because talking to him felt like having room to say something true. He had a way of meeting honesty with more honesty that made the usual protective habits feel unnecessary. That was also exactly what scared me. There were things about his world that I didn't fully understand, and wasn't sure I wanted to. The dinner in Beverly Hills where 3 men in suits had deferred to him with a specificity that felt like more than professional respect. The phone call he'd stepped away to take on our 4th date. Voice dropping, the conversation quick and clipped and nothing he explained afterward. The way certain people in certain rooms looked at him with something that was close to, but not quite, fear. I asked him about it directly, on our 5th date. We were at his house in Los Feliz. Nothing ostentatious by LA standards, but solid in the way that old California craftsman houses are, the kind that costs more than it looks like because the bones are real. "The Chicago investigation," I said. "Tell me what actually happened." He didn't flinch, didn't deflect. He told me everything. The bid rigging scheme had involved 2 large firms and a city official. A contractor who worked with all 3 parties had come to Thomas first, thinking he'd participate. Thomas had gone to his lawyer within 24 hours, and then to the FBI. He'd worn a wire for 6 weeks. The 2 firms were charged. The official pled out. "You testified against them," I said. "Yes. That's not a small thing." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." I looked at him sitting across from me in his quiet house, in the circle of lamplight, with the whole weight of what he'd just told me in the space between us. He hadn't minimized it or heroized it. He'd just said what happened. "Why did you tell me all of this?" I asked. "Because you asked." He said it simply. "And because you deserve to know what you're deciding about." "What am I deciding?" He held my gaze. "Whether this is something or not." I thought about his father's hands, pressed flat on the table. About the vacant row house 2 blocks from where he grew up. About the way he'd shifted half a step at the Gala, so I wouldn't be standing outside a circle. I thought about the pediatric wing at Cedars where the grant had come through. Margaret Harrington's office had called on Monday morning, just as she'd said. The check was approved 3 weeks later. 2 new ultrasound machines and a portable CT scanner were being installed next month. None of that was why I'd kept saying yes to dinner. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I am a person with a very ordinary life who works 12-hour shifts and drives a 2019 Civic, and finds the Langham Hotel genuinely overwhelming. I'm not going to become something I'm not." "I know," he said. "I don't want you to. I'm serious. I've seen how people get absorbed in worlds that aren't theirs, and they lose something." What did they lose? I thought about it. Themselves. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My mother was an ER tech for 31 years. St. Clair Hospital, Pittsburgh. She retired 2 years ago." He paused. "She is the most grounded person I have ever known. She is also the person I respect most in the world." I didn't know what to do with that. "I'm not asking you to become anything," he said. "I'm asking if you'll let me keep showing up." It wasn't a dramatic declaration. No grand gesture, no speech. Just that. A direct, quiet ask from a man who had, I was beginning to understand, an absolute horror of saying anything he didn't mean. I told him yes. Not because I'd resolved every question or quieted every doubt. I hadn't. The world he moved in was complex and occasionally opaque, and would probably require me to get comfortable with uncertainty in ways I wasn't used to. There would be dinners I'd feel out of place at and conversations I couldn't fully follow, and moments where the gap between his life and mine would be impossible to ignore. But he was, underneath all of it, someone who had driven back to Pittsburgh to buy a vacant house 2 blocks from where he grew up. Not because it made sense, but because he needed to believe things could be put back together. I understood that. More than he knew, I understood that. 3 months after the Langham Gala, I stood in the Cedars pediatric trauma bay during a Tuesday afternoon lull and watched our new portable CT scanner run its first pediatric scan. 6-year-old boy suspected internal bleeding after a fall, the image clean and fast and precise. The attending read it in 2 minutes. We had the child in surgery within the hour. He made it. Full recovery. I called Thomas from the parking garage. After my shift ended. 11:15 p.m. The city spread out below the structure in grids of orange light. He picked up on the second ring. The scanner ran its first scan today, I said. A beat. And? He's going to be okay. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, stripped of the professional composure, just something real underneath. That's everything, he said. I leaned against my car in the parking structure. December cold cutting through my scrubs, and I thought about a woman standing behind a pillar with a warm glass of champagne, absolutely certain she had no business being anywhere near any of this. I still didn't know, entirely, what I was doing. I still had more questions than answers about the road ahead, and the world he moved in and who I would be all inside it. But I knew this. He had stood half a step to the left so I wouldn't be on the outside of a circle. He had handed me a contact card and told me to do my own research. He had told the truth about a hard thing without being asked twice. And he had, without ceremony, without drama, without asking me to be anything other than what I was, kept showing up. Sometimes that is the whole answer. Not certainty, not resolution, not the absence of complications. Just a person who, every time the question arises of whether to stay or go, chooses to stay. Good night, Thomas, I said. Good night, Sophie, he said. And the way he said my name, the same as the first night, like something he was keeping, made me feel, in that cold parking garage with the city glittering below us, like maybe showing up to a gala alone with a warm glass of champagne, and no plan at all had been, in the end, exactly where I was supposed to be.